Excuse my French, but we just got the injury weekend from hell. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, March 10th. I am Frank Stanfield, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, all of the injuries to all of the big names. Gerrit Cole, George Kirby, Francisco Alvarez. And then we will later reveal the 2025 all head-to-head points and all roto teams. It's just such a weird transition. How do I go from mentioning injuries to something so lighthearted as the all head-to-head points?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't like. We kind of got lucky up to this point, right?
Yeah.
I remember
you were due.
I remember a few weeks ago, Chris saying, as pitchers were reporting to camp, somebody's going to need Tommy John surgery this week, and it didn't happen. And then it didn't happen the following week, and didn't happen the following week, and
well,
now it sounds like there's only one who needs Tommy John surgery, but we got a few injuries on the pitching side, especially.
Yeah. And it went like, I loved the transition from Grayson Rodriguez is totally fine. There's nothing to worry about. To Grayson Rodriguez, it's just a little tricep soreness too. Grayson Rodriguez had a cortisone shot in his elbow. I'm assuming tomorrow we're going to find out Grayson Rodriguez is retired from baseball.
Do you consider that a negative progression? Because I think...
Yeah, I think getting a cortisone shot in your elbow is a bad thing, generally speaking.
Well, isn't it to like reduce inflammation so you can get back to throwing sooner? Isn't that the idea? Because there's no structural damage.
I prefer my pitchers to not have inflammation that requires a cortisone shot.
Well, I see it as more of a treatment than a requirement. Like it's part of modern medicine. This is how we can get you to recover faster.
Right? Yeah, we'll see.
To quote Scott White, I think you're being a little bit too sanguine about these injuries, Scott.
Damn, got him.
Am I?
You might be. Well, pour one out for your boy and to Yankees fans everywhere, because we got a Morosi bomb Friday night as we found out Gerrit Cole needed tests done on his right elbow. Of course, that same elbow that gave him trouble last season. And just a few hours before recording this, Jim Bowden sent out this tweet, quote, according to a source, Gerrit Cole has been recommended to have Tommy John surgery, but they are now waiting for a second opinion to confirm the diagnosis. On Saturday, Gerrit Cole said that he was concerned about what the imaging will show. And so this all kinds of lines up together and makes sense with everything that we've heard and, just dating back to last year. So Gerrit Cole is pretty much just off our board, right? What happens to the Yankees? What happens next? What do you guys think?
I mean, it's not official that he's out for this. He's getting a second opinion, obviously, but I've gone ahead and removed him from the board because it's just once one doctor recommends it, it doesn't seem like the alternatives are ever very good. So, Gerrit Cole's just off the board. I guess Marcus Stroman has a full-time job now for as long as that lasts. He was already going to fill in for Luis Gil, who's out for at least a couple months.
Stroman started the spring training as their SP6. He's now their SP4.
So I guess Will Warren is next up, right?
I think so, yeah.
Him or Carlos Carrasco.
I would be shocked if the Yankees haven't called the Marlins to see if Sandy Alcantara is available. I don't expect that to actually happen, but I would be shocked if they haven't made that call. And I would be shocked if they haven't called Lance Lynn's agent.
Yeah. Because he's pitched for the Yankees before.
Kyle Gibson's still out there.
Something has to happen.
Yeah.
You can't waste it. Not waste, but you can't just have a year of Aaron Judge's prime go down like this, right? With the ace of your pitching staff going down for the season and not making a move. So the updated Yankees rotation as of now is Max Fried, Carlos Rodon, Clark Schmidt, Marcus Stroman, and Will Warren, who we talked about. Do you guys have any interest in Will Warren? Because he was a prospect of note. He was really bad last season in the minors, got called up, threw a couple innings in the majors, but wasn't great there either. He's looked much better this spring. They've talked about how he's throwing a newer curveball, and they're pretty excited about what they've seen. But does anyone have any expectations here for Will Warren?
There's some intriguing skills there. He's gotten decent strikeout numbers at the minor league level. He threw like 22 innings last year at the major league level and gave up 27 runs, if I'm remembering correctly. So it was pretty bad, but the overall minor league track record isn't terrible. So I think Will Warren can get thrown into the late round mix.
Scott, do you have any interest?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, he's. There's been some interesting reports this spring, some good looking numbers. He's pretty far down the list of pitchers I'm excited about who are available in the late rounds. But I'll keep an eye on him. Maybe he'll win me over the next 3 weeks, less than 3 weeks.
I am not expecting this at all. It would be crazy because Luis Gil went on to win the American League Rookie of the Year, but we were kind of saying the same thing about Luis Gil this time a year ago. So, I mean, crazier things have happened. We'll see if Will Warren, gets that opportunity to be in the rotation and what he can do with that. I sent out a tweet on Saturday, just kind of spitballing, throwing some trade targets out there. Again, I think the Yankees have to make a move, whether it's either a trade or signing a veteran pitcher. I threw Dylan Cease, Michael King's names out there just because they have, been rumored to be taking offers, but there was another report that came out on Sunday that the Padres are not looking to trade them anymore. I think the Cardinals make a lot of sense, especially
Sonny Gray or Eric Fetty.
Yeah, their pitching depth. I mean, the Yankees did the Sonny Gray thing. It didn't work in New York, but maybe they would go back to that. Eric Fetty would make some sense too. So Sandy Alcantara, maybe they go around and see. But
who doesn't have a job and could be available for literally nothing if they take on the salary? Old pal Jordan Montgomery's out there.
I thought about that one too. Yeah, I think that's fair.
The Diamondbacks would love to get rid of him, I'm sure.
That is true. Let's move over to the Mariners and George Kirby, who has been shut down from throwing due to right shoulder inflammation and will begin the season on the injured list. And pitching injuries, you just never know, because George Kirby, one of the most reliable pitchers the past few seasons, now he's hurt. Chris, how far did you lower George Kirby in your rankings?
I moved him down to around 30th at starting pitcher in both head-to-head points and Roto, and basically just dropped him right in front of Tyler Glasnow and Spencer Strider and Hunter Green and Sandy Alcantara and a bunch of other guys who kind of all have questions about how much they're going to pitch and also lots of talent. So it's possible that George Kirby ends up just missing like 2 turns in the rotation and he's totally fine. Mm-hmm. It's also possible that he's just never quite right. And it kind of ruins his season, even if he's ready to play. Kevin Gausman was the guy I was thinking of last year, where he dealt with shoulder inflammation in the spring training, ended up not missing. I think he missed 1 turn in the rotation to start the season. Velocity was down. He pitched through it. He just wasn't the same. He wasn't terrible. He was useful for fantasy, but he wasn't great. And that's my concern with George Kirby, especially because, any regression in the strikeout rate, George Kirby doesn't have a lot to give in that regard. He's pretty much an average strikeout pitcher who requires elite control. So I could see things going really sideways for him if he's just a little bit off, but I'm not gonna make that case yet.
Yeah, the timetable is short. The timetable the Mariners have given is 10 days to 2 weeks in the season. They hope he's back. Mm-hmm. It's just the uncertainty that goes along with pitching injuries, the possibility of him ramping up and still feeling it, or it affecting him in just unexpected ways. It's not like a broken bone and the whole, all the like biology that goes into pitching. If there's any like kink in the line, it can kind of throw things off and lead to other injuries, and it can just all kind of fall apart. So I want to be cautious, but it is on the surface not a serious injury with not a long, lengthy timetable. It's I moved him down to 24th, George Kirby, which you mentioned Strider. That's actually behind Strider for me. I think I have Strider higher in the rankings than you do too. I kind of moved Kirby to the end of the good glob tier.
The start of the good glob tier.
the end of the good glob
Oh,
tier,
the
actually.
end of the good glob. Okay.
The end of the good glob, which is right in the middle of the good glob,
Okay.
because there's also the. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I said it wrong. He's at the end of the start of the good glob tier.
That's what I said, Scott.
There you go. Okay.
Gosh, you're never listening.
Sorry. It's confusing. It's confusing even to me.
It is unnecessarily confusing.
Yeah, I think I've said all I need to say.
George Kirby, there have been 22 drafts in the NFBC on both Saturday and Sunday, and George Kirby's ADP came in at 129.8. That's just after Zach Gallen and Sonny Gray, just ahead of Brian Wu, Sandy Alcantara, Jarrett Jones. So just eyeballing things based on our rankings, I would probably put him in the SP 35 to 40 range, somewhere in there. And it's tougher to say just based on this weekend's drafts, just because like there was so little information and it was so new. So maybe, some people were kind of letting him slip further than he should. But that is the latest on George Kirby. And shoulders are tricky. We've seen, Kevin Gausman was a good example. Chris, you brought up where it didn't really work very well last year. But then a couple of years ago, Luis Castillo, Zach Wheeler had shoulder stuff, and they came back and they were fine. So it's really tough to say.
I remember everybody seemed a little too careful with the Zach Wheeler one.
Yeah.
And I ended up with a lot of them that year because of it. And it worked out great. So sometimes you can get a discount. I think that's especially true with the influence that NFBC has on all the fantasy baseball drafting world, because there are no IL spots and because they tend to be deeper leagues. Injured players get pushed way down draft boards. So I think there's like a built-in level of caution with injured players pretty much always. And that you can only draft so many of them, which is part of the reason why I want to mirror that caution in my rankings, because otherwise
you can put together your rankings together in a way that makes it way too easy to get too many guys. Yeah.
You guys don't have any interest in Emerson Hancock, right?
He just hasn't shown the bat missing ability. He was a top prospect at one point, and I think he's working on a cutter and a sweeper this spring. I know he's on my spreadsheet, but I don't know what he's a let's see it in the season first. I'd put him below Will Warren even.
All right, let's take our first break, but a quick reminder first that to like this video and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. 30K by opening day. Let's make that happen. And a few updates for later in the week. On tomorrow's podcast, we will be joined by Nick Pollock from Pitcher List to talk about pitchers that are doing things differently this spring and maybe players who are moving up and down his personal rankings. And then Tuesday night, I believe we will have our annual 12-team Roto auction draft, right, Scott? Is that a 7:30 start time, I believe?
It is.
All right.
It's going to be a long one.
That is going to be a long one. So if you want to hang out and watch that entire draft, then feel free to join us this Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Let's take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Who's in? Who's out? Let the madness begin. The NCAA Men's Basketball Championship Selection Show on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today. Lots of injuries still to talk about. Francisco Alvarez has been diagnosed with a fractured hamate bone in his left hand and will miss 6 to 8 weeks. Luis Torrens will slot in as the Mets starting catcher in the meantime. And Torrens had a solid season with the Mariners way back in 2021, hitting .243 with 15 home runs, but he has basically been a non-factor ever since then. Scott, is Francisco Alvarez still worth drafting late in drafts with IL spots? And do you have any interest in Luis Torrens in a 2-catcher league?
Well, Francisco Alvarez, I'd probably still draft him in a 2-catcher league with IL spots. I moved him down to 22nd in the rankings. So you imagine 12 teams, 2 catchers, 24 catchers drafted. That's going to put him in that range still, but I think it's going to be a while before we see him. I think it's going to be on the later end of that timetable. It's his receiving hand, right? The left hand.
Yep.
Which should make it, given the pounding that hand takes, it's going to require extra time in recovery. And with hamate bones, you don't always know if the power is going to be there right away for the hitter. So it's pretty straightforward in terms of how you approach him in fantasy. It's just move him way down the rankings. And if you can afford to stash him in a 2-catcher league, you take him with one of your last picks and hope he comes back pretty much looking the same.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's talk about do either of you guys care about Luis Torrens in 2-catcher leagues? Probably not, right?
No.
All right.
Not really.
Grayson Rodriguez.
He's active.
He's a warm body.
He will start games, so he might be relevant in a 2-catcher league. But no, I don't see much reason to.
NL only leagues for sure. That's about it on Luis Torrens. Grayson Rodriguez update. He's now been diagnosed with right elbow inflammation and will be shut down from throwing for 7 to 10 days. He received a cortisone injection in that elbow. Chris, I know that you were already aggressive on lowering Grayson Rodriguez. Did you lower him more?
Yeah, I lowered Grayson Rodriguez outside the top 200. So I think he's pretty much just a late round flyer at this point. It just, I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting, but
I don't know. I'm just upset about the situation.
No, me too.
If it is truly inflammation, then it's probably the timetable is probably going to be on the shorter end, like for Kirby.
I would just say, especially when it comes to elbows. And especially when it comes to a hard thrower, it might just be inflammation. It feels like there's a lot of ways this can go wrong and very few ways where it goes right.
Right.
The path to this working out requires a guy who has had season-ending injuries in 2 of the last 3 seasons. One in the minors with the lat injury last year with a lat/shoulder. It just, it doesn't feel like the right bet, I think.
Yeah, I moved him to 54th in the starting pitcher rankings. Chris has him 62nd. Interestingly, there's a bigger gap between how Chris and I rank Sean Manaea, with me also being higher on him. I moved Rodriguez basically right next to Manaea because I think the timetable will be similar, and I ranked them similarly prior to their injuries. Examination hasn't shown anything more than inflammation. And sort of like I said for George Kirby, anytime you're messing with the biology, like just the biological structure of the pitching arm, everything is so interconnected that, a seemingly small injury can turn into a bigger thing. But it doesn't sometimes too.
I will point out, I did see a quote from Rodriguez the other day. I think actually after this most recent start when all this trouble happened, where he talked about how he had tried to change his mechanics a little bit to lessen the load on the scapula, I think was what he was talking about.
Yeah, said that. Yep.
And so that is just I changed my mechanics and 3 starts in, I hurt my elbow. That feels like a big red flag too.
Yeah.
It may not be. I may be overreacting.
Yeah.
I would rather overreact than underreact to this.
I guess that's fair. To be fair, you still rank Grayson Rodriguez ahead of Bowden Francis.
Yeah.
Brandon Pfaadt.
Yeah, I think he's
Gavin
worth
Williams.
drafting just in case it works out. I will say Gavin Williams might be moving up.
Let's get him on up.
Yeah, because I actually have Grayson Rodriguez 1 spot behind Gavin Williams,
Yeah.
so I have Williams higher than you too. So it's not like you have him in the undraftable range. It's just an abundance of caution, and that's fair. I want to have an abundance of caution too, but I do think the likeliest scenario is Grayson Rodriguez is pitching at some point in April.
All right. Adolis Garcia resumed swinging a bat on Sunday and is expected to be ready for opening day. He's dealing with an oblique injury. Spencer Strider will throw at least 1 more live batting practice before getting into a spring game. Everything has been positive on Strider so far, and it sounds like he's still targeting a late April return, assuming no setbacks. Rafael Devers is scheduled to make his spring training debut this Wednesday. Brandon Nimmo received a gel injection Friday as he's dealing with knee inflammation. Scott, Nimmo is someone that I know you were excited about. Are you maybe backing off a little bit with everything going on with Nimmo? He's got the knee.
You want me to say yes. You want me to say yes. I know it. You want me to.
It's my job.
Look, I already thought he was extremely undervalued. And so I'm probably going to try and push the limits in drafts. I noticed in my TGFBI draft, which is going on, he went at his usual ADP. So I wasn't able to take advantage of this news in that league. I guess it's more a situation where I'm trying to take advantage of this news. Because again, it's just inflammation, and on a position player, that doesn't concern me as much as it does for a pitcher.
All right, Ron Washington is unsure if Luis Rengifo will be ready for opening day. He is dealing with a hamstring injury. Jurickson Profar was diagnosed with a bone bruise in his left wrist Sunday, but is expected to be ready for opening day. Marlins manager Clayton McCullough said Sunday that no innings limit is set on Sandy Alcantara. And despite being drafted just last year and having a limited track record, Astros prospect Cam Smith has a chance at cracking their opening day roster. He is having a huge spring, and he was the headliner in the Kyle Tucker trade over to the Chicago Cubs. And Chris, we were talking beforehand, it's kind of not to the same level because Wyatt Langford was ridiculous in his minor league debut, but it's the same vibes. Like Cam Smith was just drafted last year, and he's having this huge spring, and next thing you know, he might have a chance of making the opening day roster. So what do you think?
It's unexpected, but he was a guy that after he got traded, I was surprised to see how many of the prospect people really, really liked that return for the Astros. He was the return in the Kyle Tucker trade, and people really like him. His quality of contact metrics were really solid last year in the minors. Max exit velo, 111 miles per hour, really good zone contact rate, 84%. So yeah, I don't know. People seem really high on him. Even if it's not, I mean, it's one of those things where like when you looked at the Astros roster, it was like, it kind of feels like they're missing a player. And it's kind of like the Jackson Merrill situation last year, where maybe the missing player we saw on their depth chart was Cam Smith.
Maybe. I remember when that trade went through, the Kyle Tucker trade, a lot of people were like, what are the Astros thinking here?
Yeah.
They didn't get enough in return. And I was like, I think they did pretty well. They got a top prospect and a player with multiple years of control left who is a perfect fit for their ballpark. Isaac Paredes, I'm talking about. And they got what looks like is going to be a member of their starting five now in Hayden Wesneski. And look, you hate to trade a player of Kyle Tucker's caliber. You'd everything being equal, you'd rather have those guys than not have them. But if you were determined to trade him, I thought it was a pretty good return. And the way Cam Smith is looking right now, it looks even better. I presume this would mean Isaac Paredes would play second if Cam Smith did win the third base job. So that would add to his appeal.
I think they're talking about him as an outfielder, actually.
Cam Smith?
Yeah.
I was under the impression when Alex Bregman was still in play for the Astros that Altuve would play left and Paredes second in that scenario. But I don't know. Maybe something more recent has come out. If we could backtrack just for a second on the Jurickson Profar injury, because I thought this was fairly big injury news from the weekend as well. A bone bruise in the wrist is the diagnosis. It looked bad. It was a diving play in the outfield where his wrist, the glove kind of pushed the wrist back like this. And it looked like it was broken, or he must have suffered some kind of ligament damage. He seemed to be in a lot of pain. X-rays were clear, no ligament damage. Bone bruise is what they're doing. Like bone bruises, we've seen that cost guys a long time before. And so the fact the Braves are saying he's going to be ready for opening day, I don't know. That seems kind of optimistic to me, especially given how important the wrist is for hitting. I don't know. I think I'm more concerned about Profar's status than Nemo's, frankly.
Anything else, Chris? I didn't know if you were going to say anything or not.
I don't know. I mean, Nemo, it seems like a bad sign that a guy who's already dealing with plantar fasciitis is now also dealing with what seems to be like a kind of like a wear and tear knee injury. It's not like an acute injury. It just kind of seems like it's just not healthy. And that feels concerning at the start of spring training. I don't know. Like, I think like Profar is a guy that a lot of people already don't believe in. And this would be one more reason to not believe in him.
The ADP for Nimmo and Profar is comparable at this point.
Yeah. I would rather have Profar still. But no, I think it's a good point that he's dealing with a wrist injury as a hitter. That feels like a pretty concerning thing, because even if he does play through it, is it 100% healthy? Is he going to be able to generate the same kind of quality contact that fueled his breakout last season? It's a really fair question that I can't say I feel totally confident in now.
Actually, I said their ADP was similar. Over the last week, NFBC, Profar is going 20 spots ahead of Nimmo.
Well, Profar wasn't hurt yet. Nimmo was.
So I would imagine Profar is going to move down to Nimmo's range with this injury, hopefully.
I would still, I think, rather have Profar. And what I read was that the Astros were looking at Cam Smith as a corner outfield option, but with Christian Walker's injury, if he makes the team, it would likely be as a third baseman with Paredes moving over to first base. So it sounds like Cam Smith's best chance of making the roster is with if Christian Walker isn't ready.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would make sense. Though they're saying Walker should be ready since there's nothing. I think what the quote was, no strain or anything they're concerned about in the oblique.
This was from The Athletic on Friday. So that was the story that I was reading.
All right, I do want to highlight some spring training standouts, names that had big games this weekend. This is pre-Statcast. We'll get to some Statcast stuff in just a bit. But Trevor Story had a 2-home run game. Spencer Torkelson had a 2-home run game. Ty France is off to a great start with the Twins. He's 11 for 20 with 2 home runs. Blue Jays prospect Alan Roden has been very impressive, has hit 2 home runs so far. Christian Encarnacion Strand has 3 homers, could make an impact early on with Spencer Steer hurt. Pete Crow Armstrong heard all of us call him a bust and said, watch this 2-homer game on Saturday, including one off of Logan Gilbert. That's pretty good. Dalton Varsho is a name that we have not talked about at all. He has 2 home runs this spring. He is returning from right shoulder surgery. Tomoyuki Sugano, who signed with the Orioles this offseason, 3 perfect innings with 5 strikeouts on Sunday. He is up to 7 scoreless with 7 strikeouts this spring. And one other prospect you might need to know, Jack Caglione, the Royals' first-round pick last year, hit a mammoth home run on Sunday, 114.6 exit velocity, 444 feet, and he is now up to 3 home runs in the spring as well. Anyone here that you guys want to touch on? Caglione, Sugano, Varsho, PCA, CES, all the acronyms, Alan Roden, Ty France, Torkelson, and Trevor Story.
CS seems like one we should highlight because it doesn't sound like Spencer Steer's guaranteed to be ready for opening day. The problem is if Spencer Steer doesn't
sound like he's going to be.
Yeah, if Spencer Steer does play, it might just be at first base all year, which is bad for Spencer Steer, but it would also not be great for Christian Encarnacion Strand because that would leave just DH for him to play every day. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for Christian Encarnacion Strand, but he is talented enough to make the decision very, very difficult for them if it comes to it. Because if Christian Encarnacion Strand, remember, he was a top 150 pick this time last year. And if he makes the team, gets off to a huge start, hits 3 or 4 home runs in the first 2 weeks, I mean, is Spencer Steer just the full-time DH? Do they try to get him back out in the outfield if the arm is ready? I did add Spencer Steer to my bust column, and I kind of wish I had kept Christian Encarnacion Strand in my sleepers because I had him in sleepers 1.0 and I took him out for 2.0 because there was just no talk about him at the start of camp. And now looks like there's a pretty good chance he's going to be the opening day first baseman.
Just throw him back in, Chris. I won't tell anybody.
Yeah, I can just update it. I'll also just make a dumb little joke here. But of course, Alan Roden is playing well. Baseball's easy. It's not astrophysics. I was reading a story. He was an astrophysicist in college with a focus on quasars. So smart dude, put up really good numbers last year at AAA. Kind of feels like the Blue Jays have a lot of guys that, could make it tough to break in, but they seem to really like him.
I think they have Joey Loperfido projected as one of their starting outfielders.
Yeah.
Like Alan Roden can overtake Joey Loperfido,
I don't mean a lot of good players, but they've got like him and Ernie Clement and, just like Will Wagner, a lot of guys like Davis Schneider, a lot of guys, not like great players, but just like guys who are good enough that, upgrading from them is possible, but not like a huge priority. But, Rodon's 24. He played like 70 games at AAA last year. It's a pretty interesting late round sleeper.
A few things. I like Alan Rodon enough that he was my 100th sleeper and my top 100 prospects.
There you go.
Third base is also an option for Christian Encarnacion Strand, as those on the Reds beat have kept saying. I think they've mostly played him at first base this spring, in large part because Steer isn't available, and he's not good at third, but they haven't foreclosed that possibility. So if he's hitting well enough, that would be another possibility for Encarnacion Strand. And 3, I'm beginning to wonder if we, the royal we, but myself too, are underrating Tomoyuki Sugano for
I thought
fantasy.
the same thing today.
I wrote this year's Seth Lugo, and I don't think I included him. And then the next day I was like, oh, that'd be a great pick.
Yeah.
Deep arsenal, elite command. Yeah.
I wish we had data on him, because the issue is he just doesn't throw that hard, but that was kind of an issue for Shota Imanaga when he was first being introduced to us as well. And it obviously worked out okay for him. So still talking about just a late round pick for Tomoyuki Sugano, but he's at least in that discussion now, I would say.
I will point out Sugano's strikeout rates in Japan were really low. And like even relative to Shota Imanaga, like he was a 6.4 K per 9 last year. So it seems like the stuff is even worse, even though it is a somewhat similar profile, undersized, low 90s fastball, great splitter.
I do want to quickly just run through some Statcast stuff from this weekend. On Friday, Christopher Sanchez pitched well again. His velocity remained way up. He averaged 97 miles per hour on his sinker. Ronaldo Lopez got hit hard and his velocity was down quite a bit. His fastball down 2.5 miles per hour. His slider down almost 3 miles per hour. His curve down almost 5 miles per hour. Bailey Ober.
Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't hear anything more following that Ronaldo Lopez about him needing an MRI, because that was pretty alarming.
He's a tough one to figure out too, man. Because like he had the shoulder, and forearm last year, and then came back from both of those injuries and was better.
Yeah,
and
I saw some people who follow the Braves closely, kind of just like Braves Twitter, people on Braves Twitter talking about how, it started out low, but then it was back to normal. They were kind of like coming out with all these ways to justify it. I don't know. Maybe it's just a dead arm thing, but I'm a little reluctant to, if I have a draft here before his next start, I'm a little reluctant to take Ronaldo Lopez.
Scott, to your point about Braves Twitter and just team aggregation websites and Twitter accounts, they drive me crazy. They are so optimistic about every single player. It is crazy to me. It's just, I search Twitter for a lot of players' names, and it's just the most like I'll search Max Meyer and you'll get some Marlins aggregation Twitter saying Max Meyer top 3 Cy Young this year. It's just like people throw the craziest takes out there.
We know Ryan Weathers is the guy who's going to be the Cy Young contender on the Marlins.
It just grinds my gears, man. Bailey Ober built up to 63 pitches. He threw a new sinker 7 times. Casey Mize continued his strong spring. He threw 3 shutout innings with 5 strikeouts. He had 11 swinging strikes on 35 pitches, 6 of those on his splitter. Velocity way up on that splitter. And Chris, you got your wish. Felix Bautista pitched in a game with Statcast this weekend. His sinker was down 4 miles per hour. His splitter was down 2.3 compared to the last time we saw him.
Yeah, that's not what we wanted to see, but it is clarifying. And there was also a kind of weird quote from Brandon Hyde where he wasn't 100% sure Felix Bautista is going to be on the opening day roster. So I wrote up Bus 2.0. It'll be on the site later this week, but I wrote that up on Sunday. And yeah, Felix Bautista is still in there because he's still like a top 90 pick over the past 2 weeks. And there's just no way with like, I'm not saying he can't be good at 96.5 miles per hour. And obviously I'm not saying he can't build up from here, but 4 miles per hour is a big deal. And I think you have to assume he won't be as effective as he was in 2023.
All right. On Saturday, we got Jackson Jobe. Go ahead.
I believe Bailey Ober is also now throwing a sweeper. It was called a curveball, but I think it's more of a sweeper. It's a few miles per hour lower than he threw 6 sweepers. Yeah. Sorry. So yeah, that's another pitch for Bailey Ober. No idea if it's going to be any good. He didn't get any whiffs with it. He threw 6 of them. But just expanding the arsenal a little more.
On Saturday, Jackson Jobe threw 3 2/3 shutout, only 1 strikeout. He got up to 50 pitches. He threw 10 sinkers and 4 curveballs. Both are new pitches for him. Max Scherzer, 3 1/3 shutout with 6 strikeouts. He had 13 swinging strikes on 49 pitches. He has looked awesome. Zach Gallen's velocity remained down. His fastball and curve both down over 2 miles per hour. Jacob deGrom made his spring debut, 2 perfect innings with 3 strikeouts. He averaged 97 on his fastball, and it sounds like he is consciously trying to throw with less velocity. The quote, "I look back at the 2 best years of my career, and I didn't throw 100. I'd rather stick a 97 where I want rather than 100 that leaks back a little bit. I think it's pitching smarter." And that probably helps deGrom's chances of staying healthy this season.
Yeah, I got to talk about this a little bit, even though I'm sure you're wanting us to move on to all head-to-head and all roto teams, Frank.
This is more important.
There's a lot going on. Yeah, it's fine.
This might change everything for me. And I always had that caveat. When I talked about deGrom as a bust. The one thing that might change my mind is if he came out and said, the reduced velocity when he came back last September, and also it's continued into this spring, if that was an intentional change to try and stay healthy, because the whole case was back when he averaged 97 on his fastball, like he's throwing now, he was a workhorse winning Cy Youngs. And then as soon as he started cranking it up to 99 beginning in 2020, the arm couldn't hold up to that. It's proven it every year since. Now, can we take what he's saying at 100% face value? It may just be a rationalization. It may be that this is as hard as he can throw it coming back from a second Tommy John. But putting it the way he put it, that, oh yeah, he's trying to pitch smarter, is just, saving face. That's possible. But if he's going to say anything about his velocity, this is exactly what I wanted to hear. So I moved him up. You're muted, Chris. You're trying to talk, but you're muted.
You are muted.
But he's not saying it because he wanted to be healthy, right?
No,
he's saying it's an effect. No, I thought I read it as like an effectiveness thing. That he thinks he can be more effective at 97 with command.
Well, if you watch the whole quote, he addresses staying healthy.
Okay.
It's more important to stay healthy, to be available. It's in a video, so you have to watch it, and I didn't jot the whole thing down. I didn't transcribe it. But,
okay.
But yeah, no, that is part of the rationale. I moved him up from 24th in my starting pitcher rankings to 16th, which makes him just outside the top 60 players overall, which means I still probably won't. I wanted to rank him in such a way that I probably won't draft him, but not in such a way that I definitely won't draft him, which is how I had him ranked before.
Yeah, that's the same range I have him as.
All right, again, that was Jacob deGrom. A few others from Saturday. JP Sears, 3 innings, 1 run, 4 strikeouts. His velocity was up, and he had 9 swinging strikes on 60 pitches. Max Meyer, 3 innings, 2 runs, 2 strikeouts. His velocity remains way up. He had 7 swinging strikes on 33 pitches. He also threw that new sweeper 9 times in that outing. And I've seen a little bit of hype around White Sox pitching prospect Shane Smith, who threw 3 shutout innings with 5 strikeouts this weekend, including Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, and Will Smith. He struck them all out in a row in the same inning. And Shane Smith was the number 1 overall pick in the Rule 5 draft. He averaged 96.8 miles per hour on his fastball. He also mixed in a slider, changeup, and curve. So lots of names here from Saturday. Chris, was there any one that you wanted to mention?
A couple. Yeah, I think Shane Smith is pretty interesting. I think he was drafted in my AL Labor League, which is pretty annoying.
Wow, that is insane.
I wanted to go add him. He had very good numbers in the Brewers organization, and the fact that he was a Rule 5 pick basically guarantees he's going to be on the opening day roster unless they, just don't think he's any good. But if they think there's anything there, he's going to be on the roster. And unlike most Rule 5 picks, he's got experience in the upper minors. So, he's probably just an AL only guy, but the White Sox have some kind of interesting arms.
I'm seeing now he's RP eligible on CBS too. So
there you go.
Could be a sparp in head-to-head points.
Add that one. And then Jackson Jobe, why can't you get strikeouts? He's got 5 strikeouts in 8 2/3 innings this spring. He's not getting whiffs. The stuff looks unbelievable. All of the stuff plus metrics are popping. He passes the eye test. He looks good, and he's not getting the whiffs. And I don't get it. And his strikeout rate was surprisingly low last year in the minors, like 25%. It just feels like he should be better than he is.
Again, that is Jackson Jobe. And
to be clear, I still love him as a sleeper. I still think he's undervalued. I still love the upside. It's just, I would like to see more concrete evidence of the upside.
Yeah. On Scott, go ahead.
I rewatched that Jacob deGrom clip. He does address health briefly as part of the incentive, but his main focus is on effectiveness of reducing the velocity.
Scott's going to drop him.
No. I still think it's. I still think there's a lot a lot unsaid there.
So one of the things that some of the analysis about injuries has shown is that pitching closer to your max velo increases the risk. That it's not just velocity, it's how close you pitch to your max. Right. And there was a really good graphic when Justin Verlander made one of his starts last year that they showed like his average fastball velocity had been like right at 95 from the time he was like 34 to last year. But his max velocity had dropped like 3 or 4 miles per hour. And so clearly he's pushing. And so that's what I would like to know is like, he can say, oh yeah, I'm dialing it back. Is Jacob deGrom still capable of throwing 101 and he's sitting 97 now to try to stay healthy? Or is he still maxing out? That's what we can't know. And so that's
the thing. It might be a rationalization. He said it's still there if he needs to reach back for extra. So he is suggesting it's still there.
I didn't.
It's the best. It's the best thing he could say.
Sure.
It still may not mean anything, but maybe I shouldn't be so over the top in my bust prediction for him.
I have him ranked now where I've ranked him where you have him now all along. So there wasn't, I'm not going to move him into the top 10. So
yeah, I hear everything you guys are saying, and I do think it's probably a positive quote, but I'm not going to move Jacob deGrom. I'm still pretty nervous about his ability to stay healthy, but maybe he'll prove me wrong. On Sunday, 2 names with Statcast data, adding insult to the Yankees' injuries. Clay Holmes continues to look amazing this spring. 3 2/3 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts. He had 13 swinging strikes on 67 pitches, 6 on that new changeup, 2 on the new cutter, and he has been a big riser in drafts. I took him in my TGFBI slow draft. Those are 15-team Roto industry leagues that we're all competing in. I took him 216th overall, and so I would recommend that you do the same. And Gavin Williams was awesome again, 3 2/3 shutout with 7 strikeouts. He had 16 swinging strikes on 53 pitches, 11 of those on the fastball. I think these 2 in particular are probably 2 of the bigger risers in all of spring.
Yep. I hope to have a lot of shares of them when all is said and done. Clay Holmes and Gavin Williams.
All right, let's take our final break. We're probably going to run a little bit long here, but there's a lot of news to get to from the weekend, and I'm sure everyone wants to hear about it anyway. So let's take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more.
It's Gareth Bale! Goal! Wonderful goal!
On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball. Today, we are going to take a look at the 2025 All Head-to-Head Points Team and the All Roto Team. Scott has an article out including all of these names on the website if you want to follow along and read that. We did some version of this exercise last week, 2 weeks ago. Whenever we did strategy week, I can't even remember which week is which anymore. But we spoke about some players that are better in head-to-head points, some that are better in roto, but we wanted to provide more names and names at every position, regardless of which format you play in. So the all head-to-head points team, this is obviously based on the CBS Sports head-to-head point scoring format, where you get 1 point for each of a single, walk, hit by pitch, run, and RBI, 2 points for a double or a stolen base, 3 points for a triple, and 4 points for a home run. You get negative half a point for a hitter strikeout. On the pitching side of things, 3 points per inning pitched, half a point for strikeouts, 7 for a win, 7 for a save, 3 for a quality start, and -1 for each of a walk, earned run, hit by pitch, and -5 for a loss.
And the biggest differences there from maybe some other head-to-head points formats you see are we only do -1/2 for strikeouts, both on the hitting and pitching end. Some do full -1 point, which greatly reduces the pool of usable players, I would say. And then stolen bases being worth 2 points for hitters in our format. A lot of times you see only one. It helps keep base stealers value closer to where it is in roto. And 3 points for an inning for pitchers. Sometimes you see just one. So that helps to reward the high volume guys, even if they're not necessarily the most dominant inning for inning. And my choices here for the all head-to-head and all roto teams are meant to be the most representative player of that format. Obviously, they're not the best in that format because that would be kind of obvious. Yeah. These are the ones whose value changes the most or changes in a way that you could credit to it being one scoring format or the other.
All right, so in the infield of the all head-to-head points team, you have Adley Rutschman at catcher, Vinny Pasquantino, Vinny P.
Baby.
At second base, we have Jonathan India. At third base, we have Alex Bregman. And at shortstop, we have Corey Seager. Scott, anything to add to those names? Seager, Bregman, India, Vinny P, and Adley Rutschman.
Well, something they all have in common is they walk a lot. Vinny Pasquantino, I think the disparity is even bigger because he doesn't homer at the rate that you'd prefer for a first baseman. But the plate discipline is so good, not just the walks, but the lack of strikeouts, that it more than makes up for any shortcoming in home runs in a points league. So I have him ranked much higher in points than in roto. Jonathan India, kind of the same thing there, but a less extreme version than Pasquantino, I would say. And then with Seager, part of the justification for having him here, of course, he's great in both formats, but he is one of just two shortstops that are widely drafted in roto that contributes virtually nothing in stolen bases. He and Carlos Correa, who I had an honorable mention for each of these positions. Carlos Correa is the honorable mention. So it makes for a difficult build in roto if you take either Seager as your shortstop or Correa more likely middle infielder, but you're normally expecting to get steals out of those spots. And those two, Seager and Correa, just aren't going to contribute that. Don't mind it in head-to-head points because they're doing so many other things, and you don't care where the points come from as long as they're there, but it's a bigger issue in roto.
I do want to add Adley Rutschman definitely better in points than roto. Before his injury, though, last year, which was, I think, June 27th is the date that he took a foul tip off the hand, he looked like he was just emerging as
a stud,
a superstar in regardless of form. He's always been a guy who more doubles than home runs.
He's number 2 in roto still, obviously.
Not obviously. I didn't realize he's the number 3 catcher in NFBC drafts.
Oh, really? Who passed him?
Yair Diaz is like 6 picks ahead of him now. And I think that's
I don't see that in a lot of drafts.
Yeah.
Probably just an NFBC specific thing. But go ahead. I agree. It doesn't make sense.
I think that's a big mistake. I think Yair Diaz is... I added him to Bus 2.0. I like the player, but I think the playing time is going to be a little harder to come by this year in a way that is not true for Adley Rutschman. So that was just something that I noticed earlier today when I was doing my bus, that Yair Diaz is the number 2 catcher in NFBC leagues.
Yeah. And the reason for your playing time concerns with Yainer Diaz is that Yordan Alvarez expected to play more DH this season.
Full-time DH, yeah.
And they have Christian Walker at first base, assuming he's healthy. And so that just takes away 2 avenues from Yainer Diaz to be able to get more playing time, something he did last year.
Started 47 games between DH and first base last year.
Yep. Some of those honorable mentions in the infield in the all head-to-head points league: Gabriel Moreno, Josh Naylor, Marcus Semien, Max Muncy, and Carlos Correa. Those last 2 names in particular, Muncy and Correa, they are ultimate fallbacks at their respective positions, and it could work because on a per-game basis, they're still really good in this format. And also, it's a shallower format, so you can take on quote-unquote risky or injury-prone players because the replacement value is so much better on the waiver wire.
Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I would say that Muncy, the difference between Muncy's and Correa's head-to-head points value and roto value is even bigger than the difference for Bregman and Seager, who are the actual starters, not the honorable mentions. It just, I don't know. Sometimes it felt weird to put the better player as an honorable mention, and so sometimes I gave them the top spot instead. Bregman especially, like Bregman's always been a head-to-head point standout. Last year, his walk rate slipped, and so he wasn't as dominant in head-to-head points leagues as usual. But I'm presuming it's just a one-off because it was so out of character with the rest of his career, and he looks like he's going to be a threat playing his home games at Fenway Park with the Green Monster. So I think he'll get back to walking like normal. And when he walks like normal, it's not uncommon for Alex Bregman to be better in head-to-head points per game than like Austin Riley even.
Yep. In the outfield, all head-to-head points team, you have Juan Soto, Brandon Nimmo, and Ian Happ, with an honorable mention to Jurickson Profar. Chris, no surprise, all 4 of those names really good in on-base percentage.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. None of them really steal many bases. Nimmo has gotten to stealing bases over the past couple of years, but with the plantar fasciitis and the knee, it's fair to wonder if he's going to steal quite as many bases this year. So I think that makes
a decent amount.
He's usually like what, 8 to 10. So. Okay.
Hap, I think he's like 15-ish usually.
Okay, so yeah, but he usually has very good on base percentage, walks a lot,
ton of doubles.
That's
Hap's
the biggest
a doubles machine.
Yeah,
Hap has at least 34 doubles each of the last 3 years.
Scott, did you think about including Steven Kwan at all in this mix?
I thought about it.
Outfield, yeah.
He's somebody who gains value in points leagues. The reason I didn't go with him is sometimes he can be a batting average specialist at an opportune time in Roto. Like, oh, I need to catch up in batting average. Oh, good, Kwan's still there. So it's sort of like Luis Ariz, where on the whole, I think they're better in points leagues, but they have that one specialty that makes them kind of the perfect pick at times in Roto.
Yeah, that makes sense. At starting pitcher, you have Aaron Nola, Logan Webb, Zach Gallen, Seth Lugo, and Mitch Keller. And a lot of these names throw a lot of innings. Aaron Nola, the most innings in baseball since 2018. Logan Webb, 190 plus 3 years in a row. And Seth Lugo was just second in baseball with 206 and 2/3 innings last season.
Yep. Throw a lot of innings, pile up complete games. Their ERAs and whips might run a little hot, but that doesn't bother you so much in a points league because it's not scored directly, ERA and whip. It's, giving up hits, walks, earned runs, that counts against them. But if they're pitching so many innings, they can kind of cover over that. The innings are the more important thing. And somebody like Keller, specifically Mitch Keller, who I just want to touch in a Roto league at this point because of the damage he could do to ERA and whip. The vast majority of his starts are going to score a lot of points. He's going to work deep into games consistently. But then he has those really ugly starts that ruin the ERA and whip. You'll take your lumps that week with him in a points league, but for the most part, you're going to be pretty happy with him because of the way the majority of his starts go.
All right, at relief pitcher for the all head-to-head points team, you have Robert Suarez and Clay Holmes, who is a Sparp on CBS. Shout out to the other Sparps as well: Jackson Jobe, Bowden Francis, Nick Martinez, Grant Holmes, Chris Bubich. Scott, how did you land?
I obviously could have put only Sparps here, but right. It felt redundant, so I just chose Holmes. And And I put a reliever, Robert Suarez, who I think is in line for a lot of saves, but maybe in a way that's kind of ugly. I could have put Kyle Finnegan there, I guess, but I went with Suarez
also
instead.
Doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, so
right.
that'll hold his roto value back a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move over to the 2025 All Roto Team, and this is for the standard 5x5 categories, including batting average, runs, home runs, RBI, and steals on the hitting side, and wins, ERA, whip, strikeouts, and saves on the pitching side. For the infield at catcher, it's Yainer Diaz. At first base, Jake Berger. Second base, Luis Garcia Jr. Third base, Austin Riley. And shortstop, C.J. Abrams. Scott, what was your reasoning for these names in All Roto?
Well, Yainer Diaz, I mean, I guess it's kind of the inverse of the infield for the head-to-head points lineup, right? These guys don't walk by and large. Yainer Diaz, one of the worst walkers in baseball, famously doesn't walk. He's still a top 5 catcher in points leagues, but there's a bigger gap between 1 and 2, William Contreras and Adley Rutschman, and then the whole next group.
Especially because that whole next group kind of has terrible plate discipline.
Yeah, Cal Raleigh walks a fine amount, but he strikes out a ton. And then Salvador Perez would be the other one who just doesn't walk much.
Yeah, Yainer Diaz and Salvador Perez, basically the same. Perez a little more power forward, Diaz a little more batting average, but very similar plate discipline metrics.
Yep. Berger, again, doesn't walk much. Big power, though, and first base eligible at kind of the ideal spot in a roto league where it looks like the choices for those, either that position or that category, it looks like they're running low. So I could be really excited to draft him in roto, but just not interested at all in a points league.
Not sure he could go undrafted in a points league, and I think it would be okay.
Luis Garcia, same thing. With the added issue of him probably not being a full-time player, that hurts more in a head-to-head points league where volume is always a point of emphasis. And, a week where the Nationals are facing a bunch of lefties, Luis Garcia would be pretty useless to you. Austin Riley is the one that's probably the hardest to swallow because he's a stud in either format, but I talked about it a minute ago with Alex Bregman. 4-category monster in roto, but the plate discipline is just kind of unappealing, and it brings him down to a level where he's slightly less than a stud in a points league, I would say, so that Alex Bregman can compete with him, and even somebody like Alec Boehm can come close to Austin Riley's production on a per game basis. So I feel like third base, if you don't get Jose Ramirez in the first round in a points league, it's probably a position where you should wait a while.
Yeah, because it's also true of Rafael Devers.
Less true for him, but obviously he has.
Yeah, he does. He just doesn't. He doesn't walk a ton. Jazz Chisholm has bad plate discipline and steals a ton of bases. Machado, kind of similar to Austin Riley. He walks a little bit, but not a ton. He strikes out a decent amount. So yeah, all those guys probably get a little bit of a downgrade in a points league.
Some honorable mentions for the All Roto infield: Salvador Perez, Ryan Mountcastle, Jordan Westberg, Mark Vientos, and Bo Bichette. All of those names don't walk very much. Vientos strikes out quite a bit, and Bo Bichette doesn't walk much either, but also doesn't strike out much. Should hit for a good batting average, but yeah, the OBP just isn't usually a big one there for Bo Bichette. In the outfield, you've got Julio Rodriguez, Michael Harris, and Brenton Doyle. Lots of power and speed here, Scott, with an honorable mention to Pete Crow Armstrong. Lots of power and speed, but also pretty questionable plate discipline for all four.
Yeah, it's always shocking to me. Even his first 2 years, Michael Harris, as good as his first 2 years were, where he hit over 290, it's always shocking to me how low the point per game average is. It's below 3 generally, and given his stature and fantasy, you'd expect it to be higher than that. He's kind of an also-ran starter in a 3 outfielder points league. Julio Rodriguez, he goes from being a borderline first rounder in roto to a borderline second in points league, I would say, because of the poor plate discipline. Doyle, the strikeouts are going to be very high, and the steals not as useful as in roto. You mentioned Pete Crow Armstrong here as the honorable mention. He represents a trio of outfielders that I like taking in a Roto league for the amount of steals they could give me at what I think is a pretty good value. But I just have almost no interest in them in a points league. And so it's Pete Crow Armstrong. And the other two are Josh Lowe and Cedric Mullins.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Chris, you highlighted Brenton Doyle recently as maybe the player whose value changes the most from a head-to-head points league to a Roto league.
Yeah, and I think another part of it is he's playing in Coors Field. He's going to still be useful in a head-to-head points league, but he's also one of those guys where if you draft him and you've got him on your team and they've got 6 games on the road, he's probably not useful because he had a 635 OPS away from home last year. And I think look, I think he's a better hitter than that. I don't think he's the guy that if he left Coors Field, it'd just be a 635 OPS. There are reasons why Rockies hitters hit worse away from home. But as long as he's there, that's going to be an issue.
All right. Starting pitchers on the All Roto team, all the Dodgers. That's it. We can basically move on. No, it's strong per inning producers, but questions about workload. So Garrett Crochet, Blake Snell, Jacob deGrom, Tyler Glasnow, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
Yeah, this pitching staff looks on paper a lot better than the head-to-head points pitching staff, doesn't it? It's just availability questions, and not just over the course of the season, but also within a game. How deep are they going to work into the game? That's been an issue for Blake Snell at times. I imagine, it was an issue for Yoshinobu Yamamoto last year. It could be an issue for Jacob deGrom if they're working to preserve his arm. They might pull him early at times this year. And then Garrett Crochet, of course, totally untested with a high end, with a full-time starter's workload. It was really just the first half last year where he got that kind of workload.
The one thing I would quibble with is Glasnow and I guess Snell, although I think it's more true of Glasnow than Snell. When Glasnow pitches, he's an ace.
They treated him like a workhorse.
He averaged over 6 innings per start last year. Snell, he'll throw a lot of pitches, but he has never averaged 6 innings per start in a season because he's so inefficient. So that's why I say it's less true of Glasnow than Snell, but there is the added wrinkle this year of at some point they will probably have a 6-man rotation.
Yeah.
Although that seems less guaranteed now than it did a week ago when we learned all the Shohei Ohtani stuff.
And part of it's just that, okay, these guys, you expect them to excel in ERA, whip, and strikeouts. And those are the 3 contributions that clearly aren't as valuable in a points league. You want volume. So, again, ERA and whip, they have no direct reward in a points league. Strikeouts, they're worth a half a point each, but that's not nearly as... That makes them far less valuable in a points league than in a Roto league. So part of it's just, okay, these are pitchers I like for Roto, but in a points league, I'm just not that interested. And actually, Blake Snell is the one pitcher that I tier differently for points leagues than for Roto. I am a tier higher in Roto.
Mm-hmm.
And then for relief pitcher, you have AJ Puck and Edwin Uceta. Both are speculative saves options this season, but would virtually give us nothing in a points league, I would say, unless they become the closer for their respective.
Unless they become a closer, they're obviously, you could make the argument every closer is more valuable in a Roto league than a points league. I've talked plenty of times just this draft prep season about how I wait until the end of a points league draft to take my closers. Usually, they're in higher demand in Roto leagues. The saves contribution itself is more valuable, but again, like you said, Frank, Puck and Uceta, there's absolutely no reason to draft them in a points league. In a Roto league, particularly a deeper one, they might be the best you could do at a certain point in the draft when all the true saves guys are gone. You might still take them, hoping they can pad your ratios in the meantime and eventually move into a closer role. But they're not worth putting in your lineup. They're not going to do anything valuable enough in a points league to make them even worth considering there.
All right. Well, we are going to wrap there. The injury weekend is over for now, and hopefully we don't get another one, but I'm sure we'll get some more stuff before the season. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.